Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing the new tort of family violence. Now, Andrew, the Divorce Act specifically prohibits the court from considering misconduct when making a spousal support award. What's the policy rationale for that? And what did the court find about the statutory bar in this case? How did she get around it and the judge end up getting this large tort award for the wife in this case?
Well, I believe the reason why the courts don't like to look at spousal misconduct is much like what Don was saying. Litigation's expensive. And when you start having litigation about spousal misconduct, it may take something that could be a 2-day trial and turn it into a 10-day trial of arguing about who's at fault. We as a public can't afford to pay for the administration of justice to do that. There's an access to justice issue. And B, people can't afford to pay lawyers with respect to that. In this particular case, though, what the judge is referring to is the fact that there is no way to compensate the victim of violence through spousal support because she can't look at misconduct. Now, that being said, it's a little contextual and she didn't really open up the door with that, because if someone was assaulted throughout the marriage, and now they say, as this lady did, I suffer from anxiety, I suffer from depression, there's all sorts of fallout as a result of the damage that I've undergone at the hands of my former spouse, well, that goes to her ability to work. And when she says, I can't work, the payor spouse in that case is going to have to pay more spousal support if the court accepts her reason, which is in line with his misconduct. So the irony of it is, in one way, you're not supposed to talk misconduct, another way you do. But this really is, when I read this decision, which I think is very well written, it's talking about trying to compensate somebody who has been through really a horrible number of years at the hands of this perpetrator of violence.
Yeah, and there's certainly economic consequences to abuse. Now, Heather, family law, as Andrew said, it's a no-fault regime, with spousal support in particular being no fault. So, for example, if one spouse was unfaithful to another spouse, it isn't relevant to spousal support. But obviously, domestic abuse is different from infidelity. Maybe you could elaborate on how it's different and why the court should treat it so differently.
It is different than infidelity because there's an element of trauma that is very deep that comes when someone abuses their spouse or their children. And the court was trying to say that that trauma needs to be recognized and compensated for.
So, Dawn, one of the things that's interesting to me is that I want to know if this is a tort that would only really arise in the context of an ongoing family law claim. Would this only really be relevant if the abusive spouse actually has assets? Or could there be a case where, for example, a home insurance policy might be available to cover a tort, the way home insurance policies can apply to things like negligence, for example? How do these different systems interact?
Well, I think in theory, anything is possible. In reality, given the nature of insurance and that payouts are expenses, it's unlikely that they would want to add to the roster something else that would create a payout. I think it's just the practical reality of it. And I think that the difference with family. Could you repeat the first part of the question, please?
Oh, I wanted to know, would it only be relevant in cases where the abusive spouse had assets? So in this case, the order was for $150,000. Not every divorcing spouse has that money.
Okay. So in terms of assets, I think that it's realistic that the courts does not want to make orders in which the person they're just paper judgments. Mm-hmm. There has to be enforceable in some kind of way. And I think that in many ways, when you're doing litigation, you see that the spouse really does need to receive something, and maybe the law doesn't really apply for it in a direct way, and that having the assets makes it more likely, but I don't believe it would be a precondition of it.